Please welcome Tim Logue, Senior Director of Sales and Marketing for Thales Alenia Space North Americas, and O3B Networks CEO, Steve Collar.
Okay, so we've got hopefully you can read the screen.
Yeah.
Wow. Good morning. We intend to wrap up this first keynote session of the morning. You've heard some very interesting talks, and now we're going to give you another aspect of the infrastructure, if you will, of the World Telecommunications Network that will be coming online this year. I have with me, as you heard, Steve Collar. I'm Tim Logue from Thales Alenia Space. Steve is the CEO of a system called O3B for short, which stands for the other 3 billion. Those 3 billion who are underserved in the world as far as broadband and telecommunication services go. So what we hope to do in our short 20-minute session here is to give you a briefing about that, so you have something to, in fact, this is a very exciting year. In fact, we might start by talking about that, Steve. This is a very exciting year for Steve and his company, and perhaps the start of something new for the broadband internet network around the world. So why don't you tell us why 2013 is going to be so exciting?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and morning, everyone. 2013 is a very big year for O3B, but it's also a big year, I think, for the Pacific and the Pacific Islands. And it always feels great for us to come back here because PTC was the event that Greg Weiler, our founder, chose to launch O3B into the market. And he came here in 2009. And he said that we should have an ambition to take the Pacific and the Pacific Islands from among the worst connected regions in the world to the best connected regions. And he went on to describe the internet and the significance and the importance of the internet, that it had become the world's information exchange and everyone should have the opportunity to participate and an equal opportunity to participate. It's the world's marketplace. It's the world's meeting place. And also, increasingly, it's the world's hospital or doctor's surgery. It's the world's school or university. It's the place where people go for information, to interact, to communicate. And it's really important that they do that in an equal way. And I was actually in the audience that day. I was sitting listening. And the more I listened, the more hooked I became and the more interested I became. I was working at a satellite operator at the time. And Greg kind of went on to describe how fiber investments have been made in the 90s. Billions and billions of dollars have been sunk into fiber, largely bypassing this region. And those fiber investments were generally unsuccessful at the time, and how we needed to change the model. And he actually thought about O3B when he was trying to run a telco in Africa. And like I say, the more I listened, the more enthusiastic I became. And here we are 4 years on. I remember at the time Greg had a particularly nasty shirt on. So you'll see our shirts haven't dramatically improved, but we're now just a couple of months away from our launch. And we're going to make good on the promise to bring the Pacific Islands connectivity that has the potential to move the Pacific Islands and the Pacific more generally from among the worst connected places in the world to one of the best. And what I'd really like to do is share with you, just briefly, a short video which will describe, and we'll see whether this works, but we'll describe a little bit,
I think you're already up.
What's ahead of us in 2013.
Thank you for sharing that. And for those of you who are starting to fall asleep this morning, I think you're well awake now. So we've gotten a quick view, obviously a few words and no Walter Cronkite type overvoice to fill in some of the blanks. So let's do that a little bit. Obviously, the satellite industry, which you and I have been part of for a long time, have kind of been chasing the internet and trying to say we can do some of this too. And we've started in the last few years to see satellites launched that are labeled quote unquote broadband. But what distinguishes your system, which I think the show implies will become almost an instantaneous global network, what distinguishes your system from some of those other systems?
I think the single most important thing for us is latency, and that needs a little bit of explanation. So our satellites are 4 times closer to the Earth than traditional geostationary satellites, and that means it takes 4 times less time to get there and back down again. And that's not accidental. That was very much part of the whole philosophy, the whole design. It was to provide services. There were 2 fundamental things that we were trying to do: provide services in an affordable way and make the experience a great one, because it's fundamentally important, particularly for internet services, for the experience of the end user to be a great one. And a good example, we have an investor in O3b, Google, and Google know a little bit about this, right? So when you go to the Google homepage, it's not very fancy. You see Google, you see a Google Doodle, and it's very plain, and it's incredibly deliberate, and that's because it loads very, very quickly. You don't want a cluttered landing page. You want it to be as simple as possible, and one of the main reasons for that is to make sure that it has that feel of being instantaneous, because we're all creatures of habit and perception, and we perceive quality and we perceive responsiveness based upon what we find. And Google understand this, which is why they make sure that their homepage loads more quickly than anyone else's. And there's you don't have to kind of take my word for it. There's a whole bunch of statistics on this, and I'll just share a couple with you. So a 1-second delay in a page load means 7% loss in conversions of actions that the user is trying to fulfill. 11% fewer page views, and a 16% decrease in customer satisfaction. That's 1 second. That's almost nothing in terms of your experience with the internet and your experience in terms of downloading pages. And we're fighting a losing battle. In 1995, the average page size was 14 kilobytes. It's now 684. And in 3 years' time, it's going to be 1.4 megabits. So that gives you a sense of what's happening on the web. It gives you a sense of how we're having to keep up with what is this growing amount of data that's flowing over the internet. And 57% of users will stop doing what they were doing if the delay is longer than 3 seconds. So they won't continue to make the purchase that they were about to make. They won't go to a home page of any of the organizations in the room. And 3 seconds is almost no time at all when you think about a 600 millisecond delay to get to geostationary orbit. Because no web page, no interaction is just a single request. You build pages through a series of requests, a series of calls that go out to bring content in. And so almost no page over geostationary satellites will load in that time, and that means anyone who's providing services with a significant latency is going to be at a meaningful disadvantage. And so why is that important in the Pacific? Well, if you take the single biggest industry in the Pacific, it's tourism. And the tourism industry relies on a pretty sophisticated booking system. And that booking system pulls information from all over the place. It takes local information, wants to understand what the availability of hotels is here in Honolulu or in the Pacific Islands. It looks at aircraft bookings, looks at passenger information, and adds that to all the other stuff that goes on within the travel industry. And so if you're in a Pacific Island and you're sharing your information on availability over the internet, but you're doing it over a geostationary satellite, you've got a whole bunch of delay. And if someone's making a purchasing decision sitting anywhere else in the world about where they might like to go on holiday, they're obviously going to look at the beaches, but they're also going to be influenced by the experience they have in booking that travel, in booking that vacation. And so if you're using a kind of a service which doesn't give that perception of instantaneous access, you're going to be disadvantaged. And it was a fundamental part of why we designed O3b the way we did, and why we think it's really important that user experience is put right at the top of the agenda as far as the internet's concerned.
So Steve, you've talked about the metrics, if you will, and the user experience for users, and I think so we've kind of covered that aspect of it. How will the users, though, will they gain direct access to your constellation, or will this be through existing conduits?
Yeah, no, it's through ISPs, through telcos, so that the traditional providers of internet in the world, but it just gives them another way to provide access here and elsewhere in the world.
Okay, so I mean, satellite communications has been said before is kind of one of those great levelers, often because it provides a signal potentially over the whole face of the Earth below the satellite. So I guess the question would be, when we always make the comment about the Asia-Pacific region, is that there is a great diversity of markets. You've spoken particularly well this morning about the impact potentially for the Pacific Island nations, but we also have many underdeveloped areas and very well-developed areas in around the Pacific Rim. So how does O3b kind of approach that great diversity that we find in the region?
Well, so we're more focused on the emerging markets, on bringing connectivity to places that are not well connected today. But we have quite a range of services that we can offer. It's trunking into the Pacific Islands, but we announced relatively recently a second beam for Royal Caribbean. So this is a service to a cruise ship. You think about a cruise ship, it's kind of a floating island. There are 8,000 people aboard the largest cruise ships that Royal Caribbean has. A floating island with a relatively high GDP, but still a floating island. And so, we, by virtue of the fact that we can steer our beams throughout a cruise ship's voyage, and we can continually follow that cruise ship, we can provide 350 megabits on a cruise ship where previously there was 4. And you think about going on board a cruise ship and sharing 4 megabits with 8,000 people, the experience is going to be a lousy one. And Royal Caribbean understand that, and that's why they're moving to 350. So we've got a whole range of offerings that can respond to a whole bunch of different situations. The other thing I wanted to maybe touch on with respect to the region here is there's 2 things I think that you need to have: sort of technical flexibility and commercial flexibility when addressing the different demographics of the region. A great example of technical flexibility, our first customer here in the region was Telecom Cook in the Cook Islands. And when we first did that deal, the priority was really to connect the main island, the capital island in the Cook Islands, Rarotonga. And so that was what we did. We were going to put a single earth station there and provide all of the capacity into that island. But as time has moved on, there's an increasing priority also to connect the outlying islands. And this is one of the beauties of satellite, and we kind of share that benefit of satellite. So we can now we've changed that arrangement such that we can serve both the capital island and the southern chain with the same beam, the same capacity, and provide that same level of connectivity. If you have fiber, you're landing in a single spot. The islands in the Pacific are spread by hundreds of miles and thousands of miles in some cases. And so having that ability to provide the service on a diversified basis is really important. And on commercial flexibility, I think that speaks to the number of different ways that you can make your service available. So for us, that means a lease basis, so on an annual basis. It means a hybrid IRU, so a customer can use the service on a lease basis for a couple of years and then convert that to an IRU, a kind of arrangement that they'd be more familiar with talking about fiber connectivity, or the traditional IRU, which will potentially allow the island nation to attract funding from the World Bank and ADB and the like. And that's also an important consideration in the region, how to provide these services affordably to the island nations.
Very good. So keeping in mind this year's conference theme, capacity, capability, and collaboration, how do you see O3B contributing to that in the region?
So capacity is sort of what we're all about. We have more throughput on board than certainly than a traditional satellite. Even several traditional satellites deployed over the region will be the largest provider of bandwidth into the Pacific region when we launch. So that's a key enabler for us. It's like I said at the start, it's about the user experience, but it's also about affordability. And by bringing a lot of capacity, what you're able to do is drive down pricing. And at that point, you have this elastic effect where if the pricing is low enough, more and more people will use it. If you maintain prices very, very high, then you naturally restrict the number of users that will be on the system. Whereas if you can make the service more affordable, more and more people will use it, and you generate that kind of exponential traffic effect, which is something that you need a lot of capacity to support.
Very good. Before, and this is a short session, so I want to leave a few minutes for any questions from the audience. If you want to raise your hand, I'm happy to take that question. Otherwise, Del, I knew I could count on you. Go ahead.
Could you tell us what you mean by affordability? Could you talk about some numbers? Why should we believe that you are going to provide something that's not already provided in terms of numbers, not in terms of...
Yeah, so, I mean, not gonna, unfortunately, the answer is always it depends, right? But as a series of benchmarks, it wasn't untypical in this region to find capacity pricing to ISPs, telcos, I'm not talking about to the end user, but ISPs and telcos that were anywhere in the range of $2,000 a megabit to $4,000 a megabit. That was sort of the range of pricing. And frankly, continues to be in a number of places within the Pacific. We've come in and we've leveled and we've said, we never charge more than $1,000 a megabit. So already we're somewhere between 50% and even in some cases a third of the price of capacity as it was. And we're not intending to stop there. We're going to keep driving it down. We have a scalable network. We have 8 satellites that we're going to launch this year. Next year, we're bringing another 4, and each year beyond that, we're going to be looking to bring between 4 and 8 satellites. And the beauty of that is we keep driving down the cost per megabit with every satellite launch that we do. The whole constellation becomes more efficient, which means just by launching more satellites, everybody's price improves, and we're able to keep driving down that cost. It's something relatively unique in the satellite industry. So hopefully that answers the questions with real numbers.
Well, but it's not, yes it does, it's a perfect answer, but what happens if your competitors also drive down their pricing? Lasts longer, the companies in place or the new company on the block?
So look, it's a great question, and we're not here to have a price war. It's very important that the price that we're able to offer our service at an affordable level. But at that point, frankly, we're also providing the best service out there. We're providing service with a latency of 120 milliseconds round trip. And so customers are not just getting affordability, they're getting the best product. They're getting the best product at an affordable price. And so we'll see. I mean, we confidently expect the other guys to drop their prices. And I think that's great for the region. That's what should have happened 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That's what bringing connectivity to the region does. That's part of what Greg set out to do 4 years ago. So it's something that, we welcome.
Okay. Actually, we've unfortunately run out of time this quickly, but Steve, just remind us when your launches are and more importantly, actually, for the users and the telecom providers here in the audience, when will service be available from your system this year?
Yeah, so we launch in May and July, so 2 separate launch vehicles, 2 separate launches, 4 satellites at a time, May and July, and we'll be in service in September, October, and we've got 3 great customers already here in the region, with Telecom Cook, American Samoa, and Digicel in Papua New Guinea. We have a whole bunch more that we're speaking to this week, and so come September, we're going to light the region up with a phenomenal amount of new capacity.
Okay, well, very good. Well, please join me in thanking Steve for joining us this morning, and we'll look forward to the rest of 2013.